So aloha nui, mahalo for being here, folks. Ovau o Amy Sato, no Kauai mai au, ke noho nei ma kahalu'u oahu. We are so happy that you all have joined us for our very first webinar of 2024. This is titled Vulnerability and Resilience, Biodiversity, Wildfires, and a Changing Climate in Hawaii in Ka Makahiki o Nā Manu Nahele. So this is the year of the forest birds in Hawaii. I just wanted to start to provide a little bit of introduction of who SCBO is. You might have heard this acronym, and just to set intentions together before we get into the talks that I know you all came here for. So we are all under a larger umbrella that's called Society for Conservation Biology. This is a nonprofit organization, and SCB Oceania, SCBO, is a section of that, which includes the beautiful spaces like Australia, Aotearoa, New Zealand, and many of the Pacific Islands, including my own Hawaii, also places like Papua New Guinea. So a lot of beautiful spaces around that the ocean connects us represents SCB Oceania. And Misha will share a little bit more about what we're doing this upcoming year. But our aim is to increase the impact and influence of conservation science on management, education, and policy within Oceania. And as people file in to set intentions together, I wanted to share a quick chant that one of my kumua instructors, Entike Kuhi Keli'i Kanaka Ole, also one of my dear friends, Leila Dudley, composed in 2019. The mele is called Eulukini. It's just 6 lines, so short and sweet. And I'll run over the lines really quickly because there's going to be an opportunity for all of you to participate in the chat and say it out loud. We just won't be able to hear you, but we are connected. So the first line, e ulu e. This is a command to grow. Ulu means to grow, to flourish. Also the breadfruit tree that connects so many of our Pacific friends. E ulu kini o blank. This is where you're going to insert the place that you want to grow. So think about that as we talk. It can be the place you live, the place you work, place that you grew up, some place that you want to flourish and send a pulse of vitality to. So eulukini o blank. So I would say eulukini o ahui manu. And then the third line, o kane me kanaloa. These are our major water elemental deities in Hawaii. And then the fourth line, uluae ke ia, and then another blank space. So grow upwards, this either plant or animal. So start thinking about that. Doesn't have to be your favorite because I know we have a million favorite plants and animals. So something that comes to your mind right now in this moment. So you'll say uluae ke ia, and I'm gonna say papala ke pau. Okay, and then the fifth line, eulukini eulue, we're just reiterating that growth, plentiful growth. And then we're all gonna end with eulue, who means to swell, ha means to breathe. So we're gonna go, everybody, big who, ha, and that's gonna close the mele. So if everybody has the place and then a plant or an animal that you want to grow, I'm gonna let a few more friends in as we come in. And I'll chant it one time. I'm gonna bring up my hands so that you know this is the blank space that you can enter your place and the plant or animal friend that you want to include. I'm also gonna ask you folks to write it in the chat later on. Okay, makakau. Okay. If everybody can take a deep breath in, hanui loko together. And a hanui waho exhale. Mahalo, one more time. Hanui loko. Hanui waho exhale. Okay, oma kau kau. E ulue, e ulue. E ulu kini o ahui manu. Everybody's place. Okay. O kane me kanaloa. Ulua e ke ia papala ke pau. E ulu kini e ulu e. E ulu e. Everybody do a big whoo. Whoo. Mahalo. Wohala loa. Okay, so if everybody can put in the chat, just type it in. What was that place? And then if you want to also include what is that plant or animal friend that you shared with us. And then we can see, oh, I think we got people from all over the globe. I see a lot of wonderful friends in the participant list. Mahalo for joining us. And then because we're going to be featuring 3 wonderful speakers today, we'll be talking about the topic of resiliency in Hawaii in the context of both wildfires, changing climate, and then also how do we, just like how we just chanted, how do we send that pulse of vitality towards our friends, like the birds and all of these creatures that you guys are going to be putting in the chat. So just before we transition to Misha to share a little bit more and some of our collaborators, I wanted to just quickly allow our presenters to jump off mute and say aloha to you all and maybe share their place and their animal or plant friend. Let's go in order of what we're going to present. So let's see, Clay, if you can unmute and just say aloha. And I'm gonna try to find you so I can spotlight you too.
Hi, everybody. If you can find me, I can't see myself. So that's probably a good thing. Oh, there I am. Wow. All right.
Yeah, Clay, what is your, you don't have to share the screen yet, but what's your place and your plant or animal that you want to send a pulse of vitality?
I didn't put in the chat. Yeah, I was just thinking about Kea'au Valley over on the west side of Oahu. And there's big willy trees that grow in the back. A lot of them got burnt up in a fire in 2018. I'll show a picture of that fire, but yeah, those were the places I was thinking about in the plant.
Beautiful, mahalo nui.
Yeah.
Sending all the love to our really friends. Okay, I'm gonna send it to our bird man here, Bret. Nainoa.
Aloha nui kako. I would say the place that I was thinking of particularly today is the Alaka'i on Kauai, just because it's a place that could really use some help in the bird world. And then the bird that kind of came to my mind, or the animal, is the alala, just because there's some exciting stuff in the works for them coming up here in the next few months. So just kind of wishing them some luck and some vitality over the next few weeks as things are prepared for them to possibly return to the forest. So yeah, those are the 2 things that kind of I wanted to bring to this space.
Mahalo nui, Bret. Oh, and I see another wheelie and some birds coming up in the chat. Keep going, guys. Put your place and your plant or animal that you would like to ulu. And last but not least, Leahi.
Oh, aloha everybody. I love Honuaula. So Honuaula is the place I'm going to recognize. And I would have chosen Papala Kepau. That's great to attract Alawahio back down lower. But right now I'll go with a grass just to stabilize the soil. So pili.
Yay, Pili. Mahalo nui, Leahi. Okay, so that's our speakers. I promise we will get to them. We're just going to share a little bit more introduction to you folks before that. So I'm going to pass to our president of SCBO, Misha here. Mahalo.
Thank you so much, Amy. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to Amy for that wonderful introduction and for getting us all in a good headspace and setting our intentions for today. Thank you so much to our amazing speakers who've agreed to give their time today. I can't wait to hear from them shortly. As Amy said, my name is Misha Jackson. I'm the president of the Society for Conservation Biology Oceania, or SCBO, as most of us say. I'm currently based in Canberra, the capital of Australia, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of all the lands from which all of us are joining today. In my case, this is the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I just wanted to mention a couple of things briefly before we get sort of properly underway. First, for anyone who hasn't already heard, there was a big mail out today, and there's been lots of talk in the lead up. But SCB Oceania is partnering alongside SCB Global to jointly host the next International Congress for Conservation Biology, or ICCB, as many people call it, for 2025. And that's going to be in Brisbane, or Mianjin, which is the Yagara word for the site where Central Brisbane sits. The conference will be from the 15th to 20th of June at the Brisbane Convention and Exhibition Centre. So I just wanted to mention this and ask anyone who might be interested to please save the dates in your calendar. There's also a QR code on the slide. If you follow that, you can register your interest by email to get updates by email. So just wanted to do a quick plug for our conference. I also wanted to mention another event that we're really, really looking forward to. So SCBO will be hosting a forum called The Voices Across Moana Nui Akea, which roughly means expansive ocean. Thank you to Amy for sharing that word with us and with me. This forum is taking place in July as part of the 2024 Hawaii Conservation Conference, which will be held at the Hawaii Conservation Center in Honolulu from the 30th of July to the 1st of August of this year. The intention that the forum that SCBO is hosting there is to bring Indigenous voices from around Oceania to Hawaii so that people can connect and share knowledge on conservation issues that are affecting communities throughout Oceania, biodiversity and natural environments, and also to assist people and leaders to help build new collaborations and partnerships and conversations. We have some wonderful leaders who are intending to participate so far from Fiji, from Papua New Guinea, Aotearoa, New Zealand, and maybe a couple more still yet to come. So we're really excited about this event. It's been several years in the making, and we wanted to invite Emma from the Hawaii Conservation Alliance, who are the organisers of the conference and who we've been collaborating with on this, to just say a quick hello to everyone here today and just introduce HCA to anyone on the call who might not be familiar. So over to you, Emma.
Thanks so much, Misha, and thanks, Amy. We're really, really looking forward to this SCBO forum that's coming up at our conference this year. A great opportunity to build, strengthen connections across the Pacific and learn from folks dealing with a lot of the same needs, challenges, and opportunities as we do here. Thank you for inviting me to speak. I'll be very brief. The Hawaii Conservation Alliance, for those of you who don't know, is an organization that is a partnership of 26 different agencies, including both state and federal agencies, nonprofit partners that work across Hawaii in conservation. We were established in 1988, so been around for a little bit. And we have many projects, but one of the things we do is hosting an annual conference. So this year will be our 31st conference. Like I said, really, really excited to have folks from SCBO joining us this year. And I will just put in the chat briefly for those who are interested. Registration is open. I also want to point out there's a great student scholarship opportunity for students with ties to Hawaii, as well as some discounted rates up there. We do hope to be posting more information about our keynotes soon. This year we got more abstracts submitted than any other year, so they're currently undergoing abstract review, but also really excited to be putting out our schedule in the next month. So hopefully we'll be able to see some of the folks on this call there, and also invite you to please feel free to check out on our website. You can catch some video recordings from the years we were virtual. We did have to go virtual for 3 years, but there is some great recorded content there if you want to just get an idea of the types of presentations that you might see at HCC. And I'm really excited to hear from all of our speakers today. So I'm going to leave it there. And if folks have questions, feel free to just reach me through the chat.
Thank you so much, Emma. That was a great introduction. Wonderful to have you and a few other folks from HCA here as well. And finally, another connection we just wanted to remind people about at this webinar is that SCBO does have an affiliated journal, which is Pacific Conservation Biology. And we have PCB's Editor-in-Chief Emeritus Professor Mike Calver from Murdoch University in Australia, just to give us a few words about the journal and its relationship to Hawaii, SCBO, and so on. So over to you, Mike.
I'm hoping Mike is still here. I can't see him.
Oh, I did see him go in and out. Okay. well, we might hear from Mike a bit later if he has dropped out. I know he was having a couple of connection issues earlier. Okay, well, we'll put that one on ice for a minute and hopefully Mike will be able to rejoin us in a little bit and we can hear from him then. In that case, I will pass back to Amy and we will get on to our speakers.
Okay, so one moment, let me find you again, Clay. I got you. Okay. Okay, there's Clay, and I'm gonna move here. Okay, so Clay, if you would like to, you can start fiddling with your computer to try to get screen share as I do my introduction for you. But mahalo nui, everybody again. I know a few folks just jumped in a little bit later. And just a reminder, we're gonna have time for Q&A. So if you can start, if you have a question, you don't wanna forget it, and just put it in the chat. We will be bringing together the questions so that we can address them at the end of all three talks. But I wanted to introduce Clay first. Our first speaker is Clay Trauernicht. Clay grew up on Long Island, New York. He's grateful to his family for time spent camping, fishing, and surfing. Clay went to Hawaii in 1999 as a wildlife project intern, but soon turned to plant science, pursuing graduate degrees at University of Hawaii and University of Tasmania, which eventually led to work with community-based land care programs in many parts of the world. He's been an extension specialist faculty at University of Hawaii at Manoa since 2013, and working primarily on fire science and management across Hawaii and Micronesia. In 2021, though, he shifted his extension program to directly support watershed conservation and restoration workers in Hawaii. The terrible August 2023 wildfire events are reorienting his work at this time. But Clay, over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Everyone can hear me okay? I'm assuming. Yeah, so I saw some familiar folks in the chat, and so I apologize if I'm kind of repeating myself, but I have been asked a bunch to talk about fire in Hawaii. Obviously after, well, for a long time, but obviously since these horrible fires we saw in Maui last August, the story, I guess, has changed a little bit. I think, and it's really reflective of what we are resilient to and what we aren't resilient to in Hawaii and in the context of conservation. And I mean, to me, this story, and I'll talk about the slide that's up here in a second, but it really comes back to our relationship with land. And, you know, fire is such a fundamental thing to humanity. I mean, it's like our relationship to fire, it has really shaped our relationship through land as a species, right? So this is going back for millennia. We used fire to do all kinds of things on the landscape. And when we see fires like we saw in Maui, and that we're seeing elsewhere in the world, it really is a symptom of how broken that relationship is, not just to fire, but to the landscape in general. And so that's really what the story is about. And I put this slide up in almost every talk I've given, even before Maui, because it's just so emblematic of how many things are wrong when we think about land care, when we think about how we use resources. There's so many contradictions in this one slide. I took this during a fire in 2018, fires on the west side of Oahu. So this was, I think it was August 2018, and there was 3 valleys burning at once: Wakaha, Waianae, Kea'au Valley, which I had mentioned as the place I was thinking about. And the only place that didn't burn in the lower section of Makaha was the golf course, right? And so, I mean, just looking at this picture, you know, where are our resources going? What is being protected and what is not? Who is protecting us? What are we relying on in this picture, right? For protection. And this whole sort of scenario is, I think, to me, like a picture of a lack of resilience, essentially. If we want to think about the resilience of the things we love, all of the places and the animals and the friends that you guys had mentioned. You know, that's what we're really talking about here. We can talk about resilience from a fire ecological perspective with fire and these landscapes that are burning over and over and over again. I mean, actually the plants that are there are incredibly resilient to fire. But again, this is something that probably like we're not valuing. So I'll talk a little bit about like the changes in the landscape over time, but this just sort of says so much in this one picture. It's kind of incredible. So yeah, and hopefully this links to what the other folks are going to be talking about too, but it's going to be more big picture, because it really, to me, all of this stuff comes back to people. Let's see, is it going to let me go forward? There we go. So just some bigger context, and I think a lot of the folks from Hawaii will be familiar with this story, but honestly, like the scale of this didn't really dawn on me till I started working on fire. But when we look across the whole, like the main Hawaiian Islands, the whole landscape, when we think about native ecosystems, or what they're classified as native ecosystems, but these are where native species are dominant. You know, it's a minority of the landscapes, like 1.3 million acres, about, you know, give or take, are native, and about 1.5 million acres are non-native, right? So we had to have these remnant habitats that are sort of in this ocean kind of non-native ecosystem surrounding them. So it's, and I give this, I mean, again, for most people that work in conservation, they're well aware of this in Hawaii. For folks that aren't familiar with Hawaii, when we talk about like a non-native like ecosystem, it's like 100%, right? And 100% converted. There's like not, you can walk out in most of the places around our communities, there's not a single native species unless someone's planted it. Maybe that's there's some exceptions. That Big Island has some really cool lowland areas that are still native dominant, but for the most part, a lot of those ecosystems are completely converted. And when we look at that 1.5 million acres, about 1 million of those acres are grasslands and shrublands, which are pretty much dominated by African grasses. So that would be the dominant cover. And so when we think about fire, that's really what we, from an ecological perspective, are concerned with here, is just this incredible abundance of tropical savannas, basically across the landscape. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about, you know, how these systems are burning. That's what I'm talking about, like how the kind of factors come together that create the context for this fire, what they're like incredibly resilient to fire. But again, then that sort of sets us up for these kind of blue areas that we want to protect, that we care about, as well as our communities. Why we're sort of, our resilience is not very high to withstand the impacts of these. Because when these ecosystems burn, this is pretty typical what it looks like. So this is a fire on central Oahu in guinea grass, probably around the same year that those 2018 fires were burning. It's not within the realm of containment, right? This is something that, like, the firefighters that are across the road there are in trouble. They're in a bad space. There's nothing that they're going to do to stop a fire like this. And so what are all the ingredients that come together? Like, why are we seeing fires like this in the sense of like biophysical conditions? It's really, you know, climate and weather. So we've got these rainfall patterns in which we get adequate rainfall for these plants to grow, and then dry periods. So it's kind of wet, dry cycles throughout the year, or it's, you know, the leeward areas. We've got a lot of these orographic rainfall effects where you typically dry conditions in leeward areas, but again, it's wet enough for the grasses to grow. And then when they cure during the summertime, typically all of those fuels are primed to burn. It's the fuel type. So that's kind of what I was intimating with the last map, is like, we've got this about 1 million acres statewide of these grass dominated fuels, right? So we sort of have primed the landscape to burn. It makes it incredibly sensitive to these climatic fluctuations in rainfall. And then when we get hot, dry conditions, that landscape's ready to go. And then the other factor that comes into play is people. And I kind of forgot to mention this, but well, in Hawaii, it's about 99% of fires are started by humans. And this is the case across the world. Almost all fires, the majority of fires are actually started by people, whether it's intentional or accidental. I think the number is around 85% for like the North America, for example. And in a lot of parts of the world, people are setting fires intentionally to create ecological conditions that they favor. So that might be to promote certain types of plants, or maybe to manipulate resources, right? So for grazing, for controlling insects, things like this. There's all kinds of uses for fire. But in Hawaii, we're sort of kind of at the mercy of this combination of fuels and weather events. And just to give you guys a sense of frequency, we get about 800 wildfire ignitions, 800 to 1,000 wildfire ignitions every year, right? So the vast majority of these are small. The firefighters get on it quick, can contain it. But then these sort of maybe 5% or so that get big and get out of control, these have really sort of deleterious impacts on native ecosystems. So it's not so much that our native forests can't recover from fire, but it's the pressure of all these weeds, right? That kind of pink landscape that I showed you in that last map. They don't recover, right? Without active intervention, these ecosystems don't recover. And then, of course, the Maui fires, both in Lahaina and Kula, really raised attention to the vulnerability of us, of our people, of our homes, the places that we live to this, in sort of the most sort of horrific way we could have imagined. And that kind of leads me into thinking about why, or talking about why this is happening, right? Because, back to people and thinking about like conservation and what our role is in kind of increasing resilience, right? Like, how do we actually make and shape landscapes in a way that'll be less likely to see events like this? And it's pretty simple, and I'll kind of be painfully brief, but you kind of have to look at history, right? And so fire and commodities, I was kind of laughing I forgot what title I put up here, but let's just talk, don't worry about the title so much, as this top figure up here is annual area burned over the past 120 years or so. So starting about 1904. So this is area burned on the top, and then along the bottom is time. And so you can see as we go for most of the 20th century, pretty minor, right? We're talking about an average about 5,000 acres per year. Someone can convert that to metric system. I like all firefighters talk in acres. It's a really funny thing. And so my brain is in acres right now. Sorry to the folks from Australia, New Zealand, etc., but or everywhere else in the world. And then we hit the late 90s or something around there, and we get this huge increase, about a threefold increase to about 20,000 acres, fourfold increase, 20,000 acres on average, right? So what the heck is happening? Why are we like kind of seeming to run off this cliff towards within the past 20 or 30 years? And when I put that first data set together at the top, all these colleagues were like, oh, it's climate. You got to make sure the climate signal. And I was a little skeptical. Like, climate doesn't change like that, right? It's not like a quick pulse or anything. And so I started looking at land use, because ultimately what it comes down to is like, how do we have all this extensive fuels out in the world, out in our landscapes? And really what it comes down to, the best correlation you can make here is when you look at the historical change in agricultural land use. You look at pasture extents that started to decline rapidly and pretty precipitously around that same time. So starting in the 60s, and then we have agriculture on the bottom. So this is total crops on the top, little squares. Sugarcane is the big one, and then pineapple, just to a lesser extent along the bottom there, the triangles. And you can see that this big jump in fire activity really corresponds to these huge changes in land use, right? And so what are we doing on these landscapes? And I'll talk about the pictures in a second, but so we can kind of see what's happening in the middle here, right? And what really going on, but the crux of this is really trying to think about, what happened before. So if we start kind of thinking back on the other side of this timeline, right, into the 1800s, this is really linking this problem to the commodification of land, the commodification of the resources which you can extract off that land. And this is all the collision between, American and European colonists who have this kind of, global perspective on capitalism, and they're kind of bringing these industries to the land, into Hawaii, and really radically transforming all of the social, cultural resources that people had sort of implemented before, that Hawaiians had developed to live in this place. So you have this really radical transformation. You have privatization of land, again, really painfully brief privatization of land. You have literally, burning and diversion of water, burning of existing land cover to convert it to sugarcane and convert it to pasture, right? So all of this massive transformation of resources on the landscape. And then by the time you get the peak of these things happening in the middle of the 20th century, you start hitting post-World War II, and what starts happening is you've got a really militant labor movement happening in Hawaii. So people are demanding higher standards of living. They are basically the people that own the land that are making this, using the land for commodity production, start seeing another frontier develop, which is tourism and real estate, right? And so they start pivoting away from agricultural production towards land development. And really that's what we're dealing with now, right? We're sort of dealing with the aftermath, not only of the decline in agricultural production, but the imposition of, commodity production, colonization. That whole process is really what's leading to the fire issues that we're dealing with today. So it's kind of like this big picture historical perspective is necessary to understand what we're dealing with today, because if we kind of start thinking about forward, like where do we go after this, on the other side of the graph, we have to understand like these structural problems that are really preventing us from building these vibrant and resilient landscapes that we all want to see. And this is the kind of picture we can look at basically what was in Lahaina prior to colonization, right? And you had these really sophisticated systems of agricultural production, fish ponds, lo'i kalo. This is the quote that everyone's sort of realizing and bringing up after this event, like the Venice of the Pacific. But really what that was a representation of these sophisticated forms of land use that Hawaiians had put in place to provide for their families, provide for their communities. And now what we see what's being done with this, it's enough to pull your hair out, when you drive a couple miles north of Lahaina, which got incinerated in a completely preventable disaster, you see water features and golf courses, right? And so what are we doing with the resources? Who are those resources being used for the benefit of? These are the kind of big questions that I think, we think about conservation and native ecosystems, but these are like the societal choices that are being made that prohibit us from really doing the kinds of actions and the kind of work that we want to see moving forward to benefit, sort of ecological systems as well. And this is the sort of proof of it all. When you look at this, is kind of pay attention to these green areas around the Kula fire and the Lahaina fire are all those areas of abandoned sugarcane. So Lahaina, that went out in 1999, Pioneer Mill shut down, and Kula, that whole thing was in 2016 when HCNS stopped sugar production in central Maui. 3 years later, I think there was about 25,000 acres burned in central Maui. The landscapes were primed for it. We knew it was a likely scenario, these large fires at least. I don't think what any of us could foreseen of how sort of horrific, again, the impact of these fires would be. And so thinking about what happened in the past really is so critical to informing, I think, how we move forward and thinking about building these sort of resilient communities, resilient landscapes, whatever you want to call it. I mean, this is huge in the fire world, fire resilient landscapes. And this is probably the most powerful account of land use change in Lahaina. So this is by Kepa Meili, and you can go on this website and check it out. And he overlays the Mahele maps on the community of Lahaina. And so you can just see all of the little ili, like all of the little zones that people were cultivating, people were using and inhabiting. And, if we had a landscape like this, the Lahaina fire would have never happened, right? Because these places that were sort of just left abandoned for economic reasons would never have really been allowed for that vegetation to take over and these fires to happen. And the last point I'd just like to make in terms of resilience and kind of, thinking about like, how do you not go back to something like this, but how do we sort of learn from this to move forward and be thinking about what it takes to make these kind of abundant landscapes that Hawaiians created. And I think that for us in conservation, the big challenge is labor, right? It's not so much the ideas or the knowledge of the plants and the knowledge of the birds and like what they need, right? It's like we need a workforce to be able to do the work that we know needs to get done. And right. And so it goes back to a bigger social issue, structural issue, in terms of how, as societies, are we investing in creating jobs, creating a workforce that's available to do the kind of work and achieve these kind of outcomes that we need. I mean, we cannot have Lahaina happen again. Like, we don't know how to fix this in the sense of the cleanup, right? It needs to be things, and we do know what we can do to prevent this from happening again. Like the whole story of Lahaina and the Kamalu Ulu Olele, like the breadfruit groves that were there beforehand. I mean, this was just this, stunning example of resiliency, and it's not beyond us to recreate something like this or to learn from that and move forward. So yeah, that's kind of where my mind is at, is like, how do we get resources to be doing the work, transforming these landscapes into places that have all this value, and so that would also again sort of prevent this kind of disaster from happening in the future. And yeah, that's all I have to say.
Well, mahalo nui, Clay. Thank you so much. And I will personally say that I also very much love your podcast that you co-host, Latin People. So just plug that in for you. You all should listen.
Shameless self-promotion podcast. The thing I was also going to say too is we just put a paper out there for the folks in the larger Oceania. Like, fire is an issue in some of the Western Pacific as well, some of those islands. Again, it's similar issues driving it, land use change and land cover and fuels. But this just happens to unfortunately be where we've seen the largest impact socially. And I think as a conservation community, this is an opportunity for all of us to really, make the case that like the knowledge you all bring, the jobs that you all do have such immense value to society, and we're under investing in it, frankly.
Thank you so much, Clay. I know there's one question in the chat, so we will take all the questions at the end just to make sure that we have enough time for our speakers. But thank you so much, Clay, again. Mahalo nui. I'm going to switch over to Bret here. And same thing, Bret, if you want to just start screen sharing, setting that up as I introduce you. But this is another wonderful friend I get to introduce. Our next speaker is Bret Nainoa Mossman. Bret is a natural resource management specialist with the Hawaii Island Natural Area Reserve System, NARS. He specializes in native Hawaiian seabirds and forest birds, but engages in a wide variety of resource management. Bret has volunteered with a variety of organizations, including the Hawaii Wildlife Centers, Hawaii Island Festival of Birds, the Friends of Hakalo, the Three Mountain Alliance Foundation. He also has experience with successful social media campaigns and fundraising for conservation, and runs Birds Hawaii Past Present. Everybody follow him on the major social media platforms. Bret has an undergraduate degree in wildlife ecology and management from Utah State University and a master's degree in tropical conservation biology and environmental science from UH Hilo, studying Akiapola'au. Bret was born and raised in Utah, but during his time in the Ho'omai explorations program, he became inspired to work with native birds. He also has family ties to East Maui from the Ahupua'a of Nu'u on Oahu from Hau'ula, and from Kilauea, Kauai. Bret currently calls Waimea on Hawaii Island home, where you can find him cleaning yard or reading a good fantasy novel. So happy to have you, Bret. Thank you so much for giving us your time. I will pass it to you.
Mahalo nui, Amy, appreciate that introduction. Yeah, so I think I'm going to take us into a much more specific aspect of kind of climate change and resilience, just talking about our native manu, or our native birds. And so just kind of to introduce quickly, I'm just going to kind of go through some of our our different forest bird groups. So just to get started, let's see. There we go. So just for a little bit of background, Hawaii was previously home to as many as 140 native terrestrial bird species, 84 of which are what we consider our native forest birds. Unfortunately, today only 26 of those birds remain. So we're one of the extinction capitals of the world when it comes to our native birds. And historically, over the last few centuries, our high elevation habitats, particularly on Kauai, Maui, and Hawaii Island, have protected a lot of our native birds from the threats that have been introduced over time. And most importantly, the cooler temperatures at these higher elevations have protected native birds from diseases that are spread by invasive mosquitoes, particularly avian malaria. And so just to kind of give a quick overview, so we have one of our major groups of native birds are our thrushes, or Manua Maui. And these birds were at one time very widespread across the Hawaiian Islands. And they were an important group because they're a frugivore. So they're one of the main fruit-eating species that spread native plants throughout the different forest ecosystems. Today, we have one species remaining on Hawaii Island, the oma'o, which is pictured on the left, and we have one species remaining on the island of Kauai, the puaiohi, which is pictured on the right. Oma'o are still relatively abundant. There's about 120,000 of them still surviving in the island. Puaiohi are critically endangered. There's only about 500 of them left. But both of these species are really critical for maintaining seed dispersal and native plant populations within their current ranges. And then another group of birds that we have that are found throughout most of the chain, except for on the island of Maui, are Elepaio. And this group is one of the more recent arrivals, so they've actually fared fairly well. Both the Elepaio and the oma'o, both the Elepaio and the thrushes are actually fairly resistant to disease. And so even though a lot of our other birds have been really negatively impacted, both of those two groups seem to be surviving in areas of relatively high disease prevalence. And the other kind of exciting thing with these birds is they're actually increasing in some areas. So the Kauai Elepaio in particular is showing some positive trends, as well as the Oahu Elepaio, due to some extensive management of non-native predators. They've started to make a comeback. And so folks from around the Pacific would probably recognize these folks. They're in the fantail group. So Piwaka Waka over in Aotearoa and fantails and other things like that are related to these birds. And then another bird that's experienced severe declines and is now extinct in the wild is the alala. This is our native Hawaiian crow. And here in Hawaii, our crow actually evolved to be a specialist frugivore. So they are really dependent on these intact native ecosystems. And kind of going back to what Clay was saying, a lot of our lowland dry forests in particular have been converted into these monoculture grasslands, which no longer provide the habitat that was once utilized by these birds. And so they, as a result, have had a really difficult time being reestablished back into the wild. However, going forward, hopefully within the next few months, there's going to be a new attempt to release alala into the wild on Maui. So they weren't historically known from that island, but there are some subfossil remains of a very similar bird. And the hope is if we can get them established on that island, they can then be brought back to Hawaii Island over time after they've learned some of their wild behaviors. But yeah, so it's another bird that's been pretty impacted by how things have changed. And then a group of birds that has actually fared fairly well, given all of the changes that have arrived in the Hawaiian Islands, are io and pueo, or our native Hawaiian hawk and the native Hawaiian owl. Both of these species have adapted very well to the changing ecosystems. So they're actually both found most commonly in areas where there's a lot of invasion of non-native grass. And even EO, which are a specialized native forest hawk, have started to adapt to utilize these more open landscapes, and even have their highest densities in urban areas. So it's been a really interesting thing to see how these two species have been able to adapt to the changes in fairly positive ways. And then this is where we get into where we get into some of the complicated things that have arisen due to climate change. So probably arguably our most well-known group of birds are the honeycreepers. And this group of birds are really fantastic because they're all finches, and they all evolved from a single common ancestor into more than 50 different species of birds utilizing different beak shapes and just this incredible adaptive radiation. And these birds are the ones that are most threatened by climate change today. So as I kind of was talking about earlier in the presentation, many of our native birds, particularly the native honeycreepers, are extremely susceptible to diseases spread by mosquitoes. And as things have been warming, mosquito distribution and disease prevalence has been increasing dramatically throughout the Hawaiian Islands. It's most seen on the island of Kauai, where birds like the akikiki, which is the bird here in the top left, one from the top, one from the left, sorry, the akikiki, that its population in the wild is estimated to be only 3 individuals currently. And that's almost entirely due to the impacts of avian disease. And other birds have been dropping dramatically as well, such as the kiwikiu and a kohekohe on Maui, where populations have declined by 60 to 80% over the last decade. And so this is where climate change is really having a huge impact on our native bird populations. Unfortunately, there are some species that are starting to show some tolerance and resistance. So one of the ones that's seeming to do particularly well are the different amakihi. So one species of amakihi on Hawaiʻi Island and Maui, and then one species on Oahu, seem to be able to survive the disease. Same with apapane and some of our other honeycreepers. So there is some hope around the diseases. You know, some of our birds are starting to show resilience. And then in other areas, particularly on Hawaiʻi Island, extensive restoration work has been able to turn the tide on the decline. So several species like the Akiopola'au, which is the yellow bird pictured on the top one from the right, that species, even though it was thought to be the one in greatest risk of extinction 40 years ago, today it's one of the only listed species of honeycreeper in the Hawaiian Islands that's actually increasing in population. So even despite all of these disease impacts, in areas like Hawaiʻi Island, where there is this tremendous amount of grassland habitat that can be restored to native forest, we are seeing things turn around. You know, we're being able to buy some time for these incredibly sensitive species. And just to kind of highlight it a little bit too, you can really see, like, as land use and disease and invasive predators spread, you really saw this decline in habitat for native species. So this is just looking at probably our flagship honeycreeper species, the i'iwi, and how their populations and range have declined over time. So it was estimated that i'iwi populations were as high as 13 million birds in 1800, whereas today they're down to probably less than 500,000 birds, with over 80% of those being found on Hawaiʻi Island. And unfortunately now on Kauai, i'iwi are nearly extirpated. There's only a few dozen birds probably remaining on that island. So this is just a good example of what has happened. But then at the same time, like I was saying, there's been quite a bit of restoration work going on, particularly in Pu'uva'ava'a forest bird sanctuary on the island of Hawaii. And as a result, i'iwi populations have been increasing at that location over the last 10 years. So it really shows that, like, even though we're dealing with these like incredibly difficult challenges when it comes to climate change, through restoration and habitat management, we are able to cope with some of those changes and losses of bird populations. And then just to really highlight it, like, this is kind of an example of what like a typical forest bird point count survey would look like in a healthy forest on the right. So you'd get all these different species, really large numbers of apapane, i'iwi, and a really great diversity of species, compared to a forest point count survey in a forest with mosquitoes, on the left. And so you can see you lose a lot of your species and your density of birds really declines. And this can vary depending on the site. Like some sites with high malaria prevalence have really high numbers of oma'o and apapane. And then other sites have kind of lower densities like this. But this is just an example of like what I counted in 2 different surveys in 2 different forests. And the only difference here was mosquitoes. And then I kind of wanted to come back to fire a little bit and highlight what Clay spoke about. And this is something that it hasn't really emerged as a major threat for Hawaiian birds yet, just because we're fortunate in that most of the remaining Hawaiian bird habitat is in these very wet forests at higher elevation, which are more resistant to fire. However, there's been some studies that have come out now that show that a lot of the habitat that these birds rely on, the fire risk is going to be increasing quite substantially compared to our lower elevation areas. And so it's putting a lot of these birds at risk. And so that's what really makes restoring these habitats now so important, because the more of these habitats that we can restore, the more of these grasslands we can convert back into native forest, the less likely these places are going to be to burn in the future. And then I also wanted to highlight too that even when we've had fires in some of these forest bird habitats, it hasn't always resulted in catastrophic losses. For instance, in Pu'uva'ava'a, which is pictured here, there's a big fire that burned through, I think it was in the 80s, and it actually created this corridor that Akepa used pretty regularly. So Akepa kind of like this disturbed edge habitat. And so the fire, when it burned up through, it created this open patch and this edge habitat where there's this regenerating ohia and native forest canopy. And they are more abundant in those areas than they are in the intact native forest. So that's been the kind of interesting thing to see, and kind of a nice example of like something we thought was going to be so devastating ended up having a positive effect on this critically endangered bird. And now this area on the whole Kona side of Hawaii Island is the only place where a Akepa can reliably still be found. And it's not because of the fire, but it's just interesting that they have been able to adapt to this big change to their landscape. And similarly, there was a large fire in Keauhou in Hawaii Volcanoes National Park in 2018 that burned almost 4,000 acres. And in that area, even a week after the fire had burned, Elapaio, the little bird down on the bottom there, were already continuing to use that landscape. So they survived the fire and were able to still eke out a living in those environments. So it shows that like while our birds and our native ecosystems can be very susceptible, they also have this ability to adapt and survive following these big changes. And then finally, I just kind of want to talk about like what we can do to build this resiliency for keeping these native birds on the landscape. And that's something that we're very fortunate in, is that, even though we have all these problems and these losses of birds, we know all of the solutions are to protect them. All of these solutions already exist. So one of the biggest things that we're working on right now is establishing large-scale landscape predator control. So this includes trapping, using fencing, and as many different tools and things that we can access to protect birds from invasive mammals, which are a major problem here. And then restoration is another huge one. Like I was saying, the Hakalau Forest National Wildlife Refuge is one of the major restoration areas on Hawaii Island. More than 500,000 trees have been planted on the refuge, and in that area, like some populations of birds have increased by over 900%. So restoration is just this huge, and there's a huge potential for restoration, particularly on Hawaii Island, because there's these high elevation grasslands that can very quickly be converted into native acacia koa or canopy. And so those are within 5 to 10 years, you can have a canopy established that native birds are utilizing. So there's a huge potential for restoration. Then another really big one is mosquito control. And so one of the big things that Hawaii has been looking at is Wolbachia IIT, which is an incompatible insect technique, which basically acts like a mosquito birth control and allows mosquito populations to be reduced. It's primarily used for human health right now, but we're exploring using it on a landscape scale to try to preserve these bird populations in the wild. And then in addition, another major aspect of mosquito control is ungulate control, keeping pigs and other hooved animals out of critical forest habitats, severely reduce mosquito abundance. And then we're also looking at things like conservation translocations, potentially bringing birds from lower islands to Hawaiʻi Island just to buy them some time. And then like another big thing is we're really looking for people to donate and get involved. We need volunteers, we need people writing to representatives, any way that you can share a post, anything that you can get involved is a big deal for native birds. The more voices that they have, the more options we have to pursue these different solutions. And then also a big thing that I really like to encourage people is plant native. Get native trees going in your yards. Even places on Oahu, you can get amakihi coming into your yard pretty easily on Oahu compared to some of the other islands. And I mean, I've been working on planting ohia in my yard in Waimea, and I actually just had a apopane show up in my yard for the first time. And so you can see these kind of things occur. If you can plant these native plants even in your yard, you can have native birds appear. And another big one is keeping pet cats indoors. Keeping responsible pet management is a really important thing. The more we can do to prevent the feeding of feral cats and mongoose and things like that is also a huge thing that needs to occur in the islands. And then also working to stop the spread of invasive species. So whether that's rod, whether that's invasive grasses, we just need to really do our part to clean our gear, clean our boots, and make sure that we're not bringing like soil and other things between islands even, because that can really extrapolate these problems that we're already experiencing. And then finally, just kind of my last little slide, I really just encourage folks to join in celebrating Makahiki o Nā Manu Nahele, the year of the forest birds, and just like really try to highlight these birds through your everyday lives every month. So every month they're highlighting particular species. So for March, it's the Akiapola'au, and for next month in April, we're celebrating the Puaiohi and the Oma'o. So this is just kind of a way to like bring these birds into our lives every day, every month, trying to, because it can be really difficult to see them. Fortunately here on Hawaiʻi Island, we can get them in our yards, and in places on Oahu you can, but there's a lot of people that have lived their entire lives here in the islands and have never seen one of our native birds. And so just trying to like bring them to others, I think is one of the very best ways we can help them recover, just bringing them back into our lives and kind of re-engaging with them on a daily basis is a huge way that we can turn these things around. So with that, yeah, thank you. And I look forward to any questions at the end of this seminar.
Hola, mahalo, Bret. That was amazing. You always have the most wonderful pictures. Thank you so much, Bret. Yeah, I see some questions dropping in the chat, so keep them going, folks. I have my good friend coming up. I'm gonna spotlight you, Leahi. Mahalo nui, Leahi, for being here. I wanted to introduce Leahi Hall here. She's my very good friend. So long ago, in a wā kumulipo, there lived a girl who danced hale ma'u ma'u, and turns out not much has changed. Leahi is still super excited to learn about and live Hawaiʻi life ways, and grateful to dance and chant aloha to her communities, places, and spaces. Because of the tremendous support of her parents, teachers, and community, Leahi is a graduate of Punana Leo and Kulakaiapuni o Maui, the first Hawaiian language immersion school graduate to attend Stanford University, a two-time women's volleyball national champion while at Stanford, earning all Pac-10 academic honors. And recently, she's earned a doctorate from Pepperdine University, graduating with honors. Leahi studies leadership, change, and learning, loves to geek out on Hawaiian esoterica. I cackle of that. She is a student of Lonoa Honua and Anu'u of Hala Wohi'a and a kako for Oli Honua. She is a proud 2014 to 2015 First Nations Futures Program, Papa Ma Lama Lama, and continues to support the effort. She's also grateful to sit on the board of Hawaii Land Trust, Huiala Nui o Makena, and Aloha Makena. Nā ke aloha e kono, welcome Leahi.
Aw, thanks, Ames and Bret. Oh my gosh. So you folks, I got to see, I was lucky enough to see Bret a couple of days ago, continuing his great work to care for the birds all over Hawaii, but this time specifically at Mauna Kea, and creating space to support the return of Ua'u. So, and I'll share a little bit later, but because of Bret's great care for the birds, there's been a group that developed called Ahui Manu. And so it's a wonderful combination of folks who are right up close and personal with the conservation effort for the birds. And then a lot of folks who wanted to support through ritual and song and dance through Hawaiʻi Lifeway. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but I'm a huge fan of Bret. So I was stoked to be here today and to listen and to see his beautiful pictures. Okay, so let's jump into it, you guys. So we're going to relate a little bit to the phenomena of vulnerability and resilience. Lots of studies out there to look at it, but one avenue that we can go through together here is, what do our songs, what do our chants say about vulnerability and resilience in place? What about the myths? And how do these instruct us about how to relate to vulnerability and resilience? So right where you are, you guys, this is a participatory, pop into the chat. What do your songs, what do your stories, what do your myths tell you about how to relate to vulnerability and resilience in your spaces? So, you know, I'm just a student and all this kind of stuff. So whatever helps, keep it. Whatever doesn't, chuck it. It's just a reflection of my current maturity level. So if it's not, you know, mature enough, carry on, do your thing. Okay, so this is one of the first chants we learn in Lono Honua in the Oli Honua program, and it's Kini Ake Akua. And Kini, Lehu, Mano are numbers in Hawaiʻi Lifeways that point to the 400, the 400,000 potentialities that are in our Hawaiʻi universe, that are in the natural phenomena, that are just the natural phenomena, the elementals around us. So right where you are, if you have access to a window, or if you don't have access to a window, you can close your eyes and imagine. But when you look out your window and you see everything going on in the Hawaiʻi environment, what the kupuna did, what the ancestors did was recognize all these different ways life was forming and transforming right around them. And then they named them, right? Or they pointed towards the mystery of life creating itself by just giving these huge numbers, right? That pointed to, whoa, 400,000 gods, wow. But as this chant goes along, from the 400, the 400,000 gods, the potentialities, the natural phenomena, you get to the end and it says, okay, get into alignment, right? Protect us as we go into those things, that space of everything, right, where all potentials are possible. Let us emerge out into some kind of form of consciousness. And no kaupula pula at the end is to say, for me, I am your descendant, I am your sproutling. So immediately, right at the start, you recognize that in the Hawaiʻi worldview, you're not separate, right? You are everything, and all you biologists out there already know this in your own ways, right? But in Hawaiʻi worldview, they're telling you right at the start, it's like, okay, but you're a descendant. So let's kind of explore this a little bit. Okay, you don't have to read that whole thing. If you're really interested in it, you can come back to this later. But basically, this is just saying there is no difference. There is no difference between the inside, the outside, the physical, the non-physical. In the Hawaiʻi psyche, right, we have these chants that are called Mo'okuauhau, which are genealogies, and Koʻihonua, which are creation chants. And basically, they're all saying all life on earth is related, right? And so we share ancestors with every living thing on earth. All you good biologists have probably some awesome examples, like our hands resemble bat wings, segments of our DNA match mushroom genetics, that memory systems and ones that control hormones and breathing and heart rate, they're very similar from mice to humans, right? So there's all this stuff that's pointing back to, okay, just in case you forget, in all this stuff, you are related to all these living things on earth. But the cool thing that I love about the Hawaiʻi Lifeways is that the Hawaiʻi psyche not only reminds us that we are related, but that we can call on them. Like, you can dial them up. Like, hello, I need your help, right? So how do we know this? Well, one of the ways we know this is through the myth of Pele and Hi'iaka. Hi'iaka, one of her rites of passage is learning how to call on her ancestors, call on them. And so don't ever forget, right, at any point that you have the ability, when life is doing what life does, to call on all your 400,000 ancestors, and that they have to respond. Okay, so this is the ethic of aloha, and this is the way Hawaii, one of the ways the Hawaii folks recognize that all life in an ecosystem, it's all connected, right? So the island is in a constant state of relational exchange, and so that provides us the opportunity to do the same thing. How do we attune and exchange with our environment? So one of the entities that help us remember this, and we're going to get to some questions here for you in just a little bit, but is Haumea. So you'll see on the right here a print done recently by Kealo Pico, and they're super awesome. You should go check out some of the stories behind some of their prints. But what this print, it's a Haumea, it's a print for Haumea, and they write these like juicy little tidbits translating Hawaiian ka'au, or myths. And they say Haumea is the original expert of transformation. Haumea beats out the connected fibers to form a network in which life can exist. Right? She creates the web of life. So, and the red text on the left are lines from chants about Haumea. And so what it is right, when life does its thing, right? So if change is the only constant, tradition is what makes change make sense. Yeah. So it's one way to create some form of stability. Tradition is one way to create one form of stability in the immensity of life's experiences. So when life does what it does, right? When the inevitable, suffering, death come up, when the infinite comes up and you have no way to kind of ground it, you're like, the infinite, what are you talking about? 400,000. When the absurdity emerges, when love emerges, right? All these big things that I don't know if any of us will ever have the perfect definition for. But that we have these traditions that point us back to, okay, this is how you can hold the web of life, all of life. And these are the things in Haumea's web of life. These are the threads that you can pull on to find some form of stability as life changes, as change happens, right? Okay, so Ho'i ke mai ke aloha nui punika aina is a line from a Haumea chant. And what it reminds us of is that in nature, nothing exists alone, right? So in that web of life, in the fabric of the universe that Haumea creates, sometimes some of the threads get loosened, right? And so how do we start pulling on the threads that we have access to? How do we deepen our relationship with some of the threads that we have access to re-felt vitality in the web of life? Okay, so that sounds kind of like, okay, what the heck does that mean? Well, you're already doing it. A lot of the things that our ancestors pointed to, you're already doing it. It's common sense, right? So if there's a big sea of change, right? So there's capital C change. These are opportunities that they are reminding us that we can participate in the change by exchanging. Okay, so these are the opportunities to show aloha. These are the invitations to aloha to participate in an attunement and exchange with your place. So what you're going to do in the chat is take a peek at some of these. This is not exhaustive. In fact, if I'm going to scroll to the next one, but what's missing? As you look at these opportunities to exchange with the big change that's happening, right? What's missing from this list? Right, we know immediately just by breathing, just by sharing our voice, just by sweating in place, right? That's an exchange that's already happening, right? We know that dropping into the flow of exchange by giving. How many of you guys go somewhere and you make sure you have like koha, or you make sure you have some food to give to somebody that you're going to go visit, right? All of those things remind us about how to participate in the flow of exchange that's already happening around us. Thinking about eating and drinking from place, there's some examples of food webs and feeding the soil. So you have awesome stories from the folks at Koholalele at Hui Mau about the Lepo Popolo, and then you have stories from the folks at Kaulua Kalana on Oahu about the Lepo Aiia. Right, so all these examples, and Haumea is that top kind of earthly matter. So every time we take care of the soil and then we ingest the things that come out of the soil, she is reborn again in every next generation, right? Just from the microbes that are in the soil that we ingest. Okay, and just by saying place names, we activate those threads. So all these things are just pointing to when stuff gets sticky. Yeah, when you feel like I have no change available to me. What are the other threads that I can pull on in the web of life that's happening in my space that can help me support? Because those webs of life, those threads that are in Haumea's fabric, they know how to relate to each other. So sometimes in order to get to one thread, I just got to pull on the thread that's connected to it, because it knows how to relate to the thing that I want it to do. It knows how to relate to the thread that's kind of loosened up that I want to refelt into the fabric. Okay, I hope that's making sense, right? So this just helps kind of point towards what change do you have access to, right? When you feel like you have no choices, what are the change points that you have access to? And what exchange can you participate in to move life towards more life? So all of these different ones are opportunities for us. Okay, so some of the other opportunities that we have that we explore through Hawai'i Lifeways are ki'i, they're images. So in terms of the human's ability to participate in the environment, 90% of who you are is the unconscious in your psyche. That's like, what? 90%? Yeah, well, yeah. And so Hawaii were genius about how to engage the unconscious. And the language of the unconscious is their images, imagery, and feeling. And if you think about all the chants and all the stories that we have access to in Hawaii that play ultimately, that are embedded with just rich imagery and feeling, there it is. How do we make sure that we invite more of who we are, which is 90% of our unconscious? How do we invite more of that into the space to engage, right, in the web of life? Images, like Bret's images of birds. Those things are so cute. They're so wonderful. And just by having those images up during some of our aha, during some of our ritual for Ahui Manu, we start to engage more of the human beyond just the conscious, just the 10% that's in the conscious realm that we're aware of. Right? We begin to engage and invite the 90% that's unconscious to participate. And then the other thing that Hawaiians were genius with, at the end of chants, there's often this line that says "Uaikea," and what we want to invite back into our experience is the opportunity to be just to have robust, radical imagination about what's possible. Uaikea says it's done already, right? So anytime I do a chant, everything that I do in the chant, at the end when Uaikea happens, it's saying it's done. It has happened. It means you're living your future right now. It means you're so clear on the image of that future. You're so clear on the feeling that aligns with that image that you pull it towards you from the pure potentiality that's out in front of you. You pull that reality, that future towards you from the 400,000 potentials that are out in front of you. You can never forget how important your imagination is to creating the future that we want to go with. So when we listen to the two folks before, right, we already have these examples of the futures we want to live. Okay, now my job is to image that and layer the feeling on it and start acting like that, start living like that, start behaving like that, and I pull that future towards me. Right, so in the chat, you want to put in right now, what's something you want to ikea? What's the future you want to live right now? We have to think with powerful imaginations. When the work gets hard, it gets way harder to have robust imagination, be a visionary. It's so hard because you see the reality and it sucks. And then we come back into these spaces and say, okay, but I know how powerful my imagination is. Okay, so hopefully you're putting in there in the chat what you want to ikea. And we'll go a little quickly through some of this, but what this reminds us of participating in life, this comes from Prentice Hempel, who is awesome. You guys should go Google her, but she's the founder of the Embodiment Institute. And then the little piece below there, the little image below there is from Dr. Paul Conti, who did like 4 podcasts with Andrew Huberman on well-being. And so this comes back to, if I'm a part of the web of life, right? How can I participate as a human? So Prentice says, this is one way to participate in life, right? Is to sit at the feet of life. And that's the humility, the humble aspect of it. But inspired enough to join life, right? So you got to have some agency, but not in such a way that you think you can or should control the outcome. So this is, where can I have some agency? Where can I have some humility? Knowing that I can't control the outcome, right? Where are those spots in your life? And especially for our Manu and for returning native forests and for having an awesome workforce of people, where are the places that I can have agency? Where do I need a little bit of humility to just know I cannot control everything? I won't control everything. So what you see here on the pillars of mental health is empowerment and humility. They lead into agency and gratitude. And all you got to do is solve for agency and gratitude, and peace, contentment, and delight emerge out of there. You don't solve for peace, contentment, and delight. You create an opportunity for people to feel empowered, for people to feel humility again about participating in life, right? And so where in these, and these the last couple slides from Bret were awesome in terms of telling us some agency opportunities we have, right? And then the humility part can be, oh, I'm gonna go outside and sing songs to the birds. Okay, but whatever that is for you, don't forget that as long as you tap into a little bit of agency, you have some humility, that it's gonna lead to peace, contentment, and delight. I don't think any of our ancestors wanted us to live lives that didn't provide us the opportunity to reach those things. Okay, and then the generative drive thing is awesome, because what it points to in the resilience and vulnerability of things, the generative drive is just the invitation to participate in life. And it's awesome. It's most helpful when you pair up with folks with similar generative drive as you. So maybe we can all be new friends here, and we can go follow Bret's Birds Hawaiʻi Past Present, and we can be the generative drive on his by sharing all his stuff. Okay, but these are pathways to health and well-being, and we know that we're part of the web of life, and if we're good, then the birds can be good too. We're connected. Okay, all right, next. Simple is better than complex. So kipuka are examples of these. The small is a reflection of the large. Kuahu are examples of these. Kapeva komanini is a Hawai'i phrase, but that Dr. Taupori Tangaro described. And so you guys are going to drop into the chat what some of your peva are, but this is how he described peva komanini. So sometimes you just need, the peva is the tail. So sometimes you just need the tail and you can rebuild the whole fish. Okay, so in one way to understand this is that energy is not created or destroyed. It only changes form, right? So sometimes you just need a tail and you can rebuild the whole fish. One little clue or artifact is all you need, and it will wake you up and wake up that knowledge. Okay, our knowledge can't die. It can go to sleep. Our job is to put us into situations or places that is conducive to waking up that knowledge. So all Bret had to do, well, one thing Bret had to do choke things to get where he is, but he just had to go to Ho'omaka'ikai. And then this little inkling, this little seed developed in him. And then now, look at all the things that have emerged in all of Bret's study of birds, and in his deepening relationship with the birds, what has emerged out of that. So what's the peva for you? What's that one thing? Knowing that in the animate universe that we're participating in, I just got to find that one little piece. And if I continue to deepen my relationship with that one thing, the whole fish will emerge. Okay. And then last two slides here about aha, in specific, aha's ceremony or ritual. So on the left side, you see chant text and mele text from the Kulia Euli. So ukuika, loa kauhala ukuika oivi. Ukuika oivi is filial piety, right? So it's the multi-generational familiar relationship to the environment. It's the sweat and the work our bodies do to maintain a healthy landscape, which means a full life. The kulia euli are supplications for life. If change is the constant, the kulia euli are chants and one way to access health and balance and well-being through ke alohilani, which is seasonal perfection. Yeah. So this one thing that kulia euli can point to is in the homeodynamics, it's homeostasis. Yeah, so when I'm looking for resilience, it's the how far can I swing out from that center, but always returning back to that center. All right. When the fires happened in Lahaina, I'm not from Lahaina. Yeah, I'm not from Lahaina. But a lot of people wanted to support in some way. Right, and so what Lonoa Honua did is we had a couple of aha, which are ritual after the event and while the event was going on. And one thing we totally did is, we followed the lead of community leadership, right? We empower the right people. And we had humility. We had faith in the web of life, in the network of life that we know how Mea sets out for us, right? We tried to pull on the right threads. And we express generative drive by getting together to do aha. We're always way more powerful when we do things together. But what I want to point to is that in that moment when Auntie Kikuhi, who is Amy and I's, we are learners with her, she asked me to come up with certain songs, certain images to pull on for the aha. And I didn't have the best images. I went through what I knew at the time, which is, well, let's call on Kane and water. And I have a friend named CJ who is a scientist of clouds and water movement and all Kane forms, all the way that heat animates and catalyzes our ecosystem. And CJ said, no, the process you need to call on is actually the laka process. We need to build clouds to pull in the humidity. And that moisture needs to be held in place, that the winds and the moisture are familiar to the vow, to these horizontal spaces that they return, right? So we had different winds at the time. They weren't the normal winds. The firefighters could deal with it if they had the normal winds in place, but because the winds were so different, we needed to call back on the winds that are normal to the place to return. So I am thinking water, water, water. And he's like, no, there's so much stuff on the top layer of the earth. If we call on too much water, it'll flow right down into the ocean. We need laka. So what it points to in this is the power of people like you folks on this call who have deepened your relationship with biology in many of its different forms. That we can improve the efficacy of the aha when we work together towards life, for pulses of vitality, for these things that are so precious to us and precious to our ecosystems. Last slide is about Ahui Manu. So this is a picture from Kaulana Manu Trail, which is on Hawaiʻi Island. But sometimes all you got to do is go to the places that are named after Manu names, and you give them a little bit of aloha, and that's the peva of the rest of the fish that forms itself. So aha ho'akoi manu are rituals that we have done with Bret's help over the last few fledgling seasons. And it's to remember, relash, reaffirm our ties, our bond to our most ancient Manu people, our elder siblings, the Manu folks. And part of this worldview, right, the Hawaiʻi worldview, is we aren't part of the ritual, right? We are the ritual. In the web of life, we are the ritual. So we are the communicators, we are the mediators, we are the haka for the aha, for that change to happen, for the aha to happen. So this is like one of the examples. So aha is a cord that gets made out of coconut husk, and it's all these fibers come together to create this cord, right? So this is like aha, or like the original coconut wireless. It's like how it's one way for you to engage with, and Kikuhi says this, and I love it. It's like, you know, in Hawaiʻi worldview, 1% of Hawaiʻi is material, 99% is immaterial, not material. So aha is one way to engage with that 99% that is not material. And many people have different ways to do it, but one good way that we found is to pair up with our friends like Bret to help improve the efficacy of our rituals, to help really understand, okay, this week we're going to focus on the thickness of the eggs. Like when the eggs are coming out, we want the eggs to be super thick. So what images, what chants do we have access to that can point to, okay, super thick eggs? What chants do we have access to when there's a big storm? Okay, for them to learn how to, don't forget to go, you already know this, birds, but go back to like a nest, someplace that you can have protection during the big storm events, right? So that's only possible if we pair up and we work together to combine not only the science, but the spiritual, which is science still also, but we do it together. So aha ho'akua lahui manu, if you guys are interested, go check out Lono Honua and sign up. You can come do it with us. It's super fun. The two things that I think aha ho'akua lahui manu tap into, it's not a typical, like, it's not your typical ritual. It's kind of actually playful. We mimic bird sounds. So Bret can test me right now. Wa'u, I think, whoa. but he's the guy who can really do it. But it's playful, and one of the fastest ways to support change is to play. You can repeat something 400 times to try to become a master of it, or you can do something with play 20 times and you change. So we created a ritual with a little bit of play to it, and we created a ritual together with our bird folks that help you get into awe, which is the fastest way for change to happen. Awe and play, right? So awe is like, wow, this thing is just so incredible. I don't even wonder about it. I'm not even trying to study it. It's just awesome. So Bret's pictures help us have those moments of awe with these birds that can seem so far from us, right? And he brings them right up close for us to enjoy. So those are the two things I think that however you're trying to move with your spaces and care for them, play and awe are also an opportunity to invite the fastest form of change in place. Okay, mahalo.
Mahalo nui Leahi. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass to Misha just to help wrap up our presenting.
Wow, what a journey. That was an incredible set of perspectives and just knowledge and kind of mind-opening things to share with us. So firstly, I just want to say thank you so much to everyone for joining, and also to our speakers. We have officially run out of time, so I think what I'll do is kind of officially close off the session, send a couple of things quickly in the chat, but we might stay for about 10 more minutes and do a few informal questions for anyone who does want to stay. So just to wrap up on the formal side of things, I'm just going to drop into the chat a quick Google form. We'll send this maybe around by email as well to the registrants, but we just love your feedback on this webinar because as we said, it is kind of our first one in a while and our first one for the year. So we'd love to hear your thoughts. I also just wanted to extend apologies from Mike at Pacific Conservation Biology. He had insurmountable technical issues, but I'm going to just drop the link for the journal into the chat, and hopefully we'll have Mike along to our next webinar and he can say hi to folks then. I hope others feel like me that there are these, invisible little lines of connection now extending all over Oceania as a result of this. It's a wonderful feeling. Yeah, just want to remind you once more about the ICCB next summer. Consider that, and also the Hawaii Conservation Alliance conference coming up this year. You should have links for those already, but I'll kind of bring it to an official close